Namaste and welcome you all again. Sve sve karmanyabhiratah sansiddhim labhate nara. Being engaged in action, one must aspire for achieving perfection. And this is what is the core aspect of today's topic by Gitanjali. So I welcome you, Gitanjali, and request Deepa to give an introduction to Gitanjali and take it forward.
Namaste and good morning, everybody. We have Gitanjali with us today, and she is a social entrepreneur who has set up several business ventures and social initiatives. Currently, she has set up and is the founder and the CEO and dean of the Himalayan Institute of Alternatives in Ladakh. The purpose of this institute is to revolutionize higher education through experiential learning. Gitanjali has been a devotee of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother all through her life, and she has a very keen interest in learning Sanskrit, the Vedas, Upanishads, and Indian culture. She would love to use these things, and she works towards using the knowledge gained in this field to indigenize higher education frameworks in India. Over to you, Gitanjali.
Thank you, Deepa. And namaste and good morning, everybody from Ladakh at 12,000 feet above sea level. And it's trans-Himalayan, it's beyond the Himalayas. An ideal place to talk about Karma Yoga, because just by being here, you feel like a true Karma Yogin. You know, you are in the world, but not of it. You're beyond the Himalayas in the trans-Himalayan region. And in front of me, I can see the peak that's called Stok Kangri, which literally translates to from where you can see Kailash. So the abode of Lord Shiva is can be seen from Stok Kangri, which I can see from here. And Shiva, along with Krishna, are all of us as role models for Karma Yoga. And this house that you see here is made of earth, clay. And last night it was -5 degrees outside, but it stayed at a comfortable 20 degrees without any artificial heating. And that is the indigenous wisdom that we had in making homes out of clay. So now we embark on the topic of Karma Yoga, and this is the 6th day. It's a very special day also of Navratri, because I think every day we invoke a certain aspect of the divine Shakti, and I think today it is the Shakti of discernment and decision in action. Very apt again for talking about Karma Yoga. So Karma Yoga, we know, comes from the root Kri, it's to do, and to do work. But what is this work is something we will dwell a little bit upon. It is different from what physics defines as work, which is force multiplied by displacement. Because unless one is displaced by physics, one does not constitute doing work. But in yoga, sadhana, even when I'm just sitting like this and talking to you, I'm not getting displaced. I'm doing work because I'm talking. Even if I were to stop talking and close my eyes and meditate, I'm still working because I am maybe thinking something or I'm feeling something. So work is right from doing our office to domestic chores to other things that we do, right up to exercising, breathing, even sleeping. And while sleeping, even dreaming is work. So right from the time we are born and all along that we live on earth, we are actually doing work. And that is why Karma Yoga assumes a lot of importance, because it is based on that fundamental doctrine that it is impossible, to have a cessation from work. And why the cessation from work was even thought about is because the very inherent property of work is that it has an inbuilt consequence, because every work has a good and evil built into it, and which gives rise to a consequence. And every consequence has to be faced and lived. And therefore, as long as one keeps working, one has to keep taking birth and going through this cycle, and there cannot be any liberation. So one of the paths for achieving liberation was to define work through the Shastras, through the various smritis, that this is work and this is the minimum work, and just do that, because if you do more of that, then you start attracting karma, and you cannot be liberated. So work on one hand, which keeps you in this manifestation, and knowledge, which was considered a tool of liberation, was therefore considered like opposites to each other, action and knowledge. And that is where we will come to the Bhagavad-Gita, where Sri Krishna, he reconciled karma and knowledge. But before we come to the Gita, let us take a step back and see what Gita forms a part of, and why did Krishna talk about Karmayoga. So we know the story of Mahabharata. There are the two sides, the Kauravas and the Pandavas, who are engaged in a fight. And that is when Arjuna, when he sees the huge work that he is supposed to do of, destroying the very relatives and teachers and gurus of with whom he has grown up and learned, he suddenly gives up his bow and arrow and his, and says that I cannot fight. So it is at this point that the Bhagavad-Gita starts, when Dhritarashtra asks Sanjaya that Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetre, where all the people are assembled together, tell me, Sanjay, what's going on? So these are the four characters we'll briefly look into what they symbolize, because these works, as we know, have their parables or allegories of not just outer happenings, but of inner life and inner struggles and inner pursuits. So the hero of the Gita and the Mahabharata is Arjuna. Arjuna, who is representative of the human soul, and his charioteer is Krishna. This is the classic combination of Nara and Narayana, of the human soul and the divine counterpart. The two birds of the Mundaka Upanishad, one that eats the fruit of this manifestation, and the other, the silent witness, the Atman, that is seated above as a witness and that sees everything. So we have Arjuna and Krishna as Nara and Narayana, the human soul and the divine soul. And then when we have Dhritarashtra, with whom the Bhagavad Gita starts, who is a representative of the, one could say, empirical ego, which though is the king, yet he is not the true ruler, because he is driven by the slavery of the passions represented by his sons, who represent ego and desire. So that is Dhritarashtra, the mind, the empirical ego, or you could say the lower mind. And Sanjaya, who is the link between the battlefield, what's happening, Arjuna and Dhritarashtra. So we could say that Arjuna is the higher mind, the buddhi, and Dhritarashtra is the lower mind, and Sanjaya is that conscience, the conscience which can choose where to focus and bridges the two minds. So this is the inner allegory we can take of these four central characters. And when the Bhagavad Gita starts, Dhritarashtra would like to know what is happening. And this is where the first chapter of the Gita has 18 chapters, and they are in a proper sequence. And this sequence is not random. It is the evolution of the human soul. It represents the evolution of the human soul. So generally, the first chapter is kind of overlooked. Arjuna Vishada Yoga, the rejection of Arjuna, but it is an important chapter to be explored. And why? Because so far, Arjuna represents the ideal man. He has been trained in the Shastra, in the ethical traditions. He has the gurus, he has learned the vidyas of archery, of the world, of spirituality. And yet, he comes to a point in life where none of his earlier precepts or knowledge is able to help him to negotiate this particular circumstance in which he finds himself. And that is the turning point of the soul. The Buddha also went through this, the suffering, the valley of sorrow. Mother says that there are some people who are very happy with the way the world is. So please don't disturb them and ask them to do, sadhana or yoga, because they're happy with the way world is. But it is only the soul that is seeking, that has reached a point of evolution or a particular circumstance in life where the outer knowledge or all that one had studied is not helping anymore, that the soul becomes ready to understand new knowledge. And that is where the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita starts. And all of us who have registered for this course or who want to know what is Karma Yoga, I think, like Arjuna, we represent that stage of the soul where we are seeking for a deeper meaning. It could be that somebody we trusted betrayed us, or maybe a job or something we thought was the ideal thing did not turn out that way, or something where we start to look into a deeper meaning of why is this life there at all? What are we here to do? How do we negotiate this particular circumstance in which we find ourselves? And that is the contribution of the first chapter. And Karma Yoga only comes in the third chapter. But in the second chapter, what Krishna, therefore, tells Arjuna is that what is Sankhya and what is Yoga. So when Arjuna does not have any answer, he just wants another practical means, another practical tool by which he can either fight or not fight. But a good teacher does not just give you a particular tool for that moment, but he truly gives you a worldview. The worldview of what is all this? What is the structure of this world? What is the scheme? Why are we here? And that is what, through Sankhya, the first turn of the human soul is to know another knowledge, another deeper knowledge. And yet, Krishna makes a beautiful distinction between Sankhya when he says this is by what people call Sankhya and this is what is yoga. So that distinction is what marks the departure into Karma Yoga. So the yoga, the knowledge of the Sankhya is the analytic knowledge of when the mind first wants to understand what it is. But that knowledge does not become a living knowledge unless it is lived through experience. And that is what is called yoga, or it is the yoga of works. And we will come to this in our talk today. But before we go into it, let us first understand what is not work. You know, I think in one of the earlier sessions it was discussed. For instance, if I am a workaholic, I get up in the morning until night I'm working. It may be work, but it may be karma. But is it karma yoga? If I'm doing a lot of philanthropy, I'm feeding a lot of poor people, starting hospitals and schools, that may be work or karma, but is it karma yoga? Duty to one's family, duty to the larger society, or even one's country, is that karma yoga? The answer is both yes and no. And the difference lies in the intent and the methodology of it. So if the intent is for personal benefit, because there is a certain thing I'm expecting at the end of it, or if there is a preferred method of doing it, then it is just karma. But if it is done without any personal benefit or seeking, and there is no attachment even to the methodology, and finally of the doer, and then it becomes karma yoga. So outwardly, uh, there is no difference. You cannot see unless one is himself a karma yogin and has perfected it. Outwardly, it is not possible to know whether somebody is a karma yogi or is just doing karma. And this is where the fine distinction between karma yoga and other yogas of the Bhagavad-Gita, the other two or three maybe, the Gyan, Bhakti or Raj Yoga, also the practice of meditation, differ. All the other three yogas can be done privately. I can sit in my room and I can do meditation, I can have bhakti, I can, know the oneness that exists through Gyan. But Karma Yoga is the only yoga that is a public yoga. One does it in the world. One does it when one relates to others. One does it when one is engaged in outwardly the same work which somebody else may be doing out of purely, a personal desire or benefit. So the Karma Yoga is, any act can be just a karma or a Karma Yoga. And the distinction is in one of these three things. Is there a fruit at the end of it that I desire? Then, if yes, then I'm not doing Karma Yoga. Am I doing it because this is how I want to do it? This is the preferred methodology or the modality? If yes, and I cannot do it in another way, then it is not Karma Yoga. It is karma, just work. And finally, am I doing it? Do I have that sense of the worker even? And then if the answer is yes, I'm not doing Karma Yoga. So this is a long journey where it's through self-awareness that one keeps at every step asking these questions and rectifying the inner compass that one kind of works with. The next question comes that when are we ready to do Karma Yoga? I mean, should I not wait till I have realized the Brahman? Because only then I can do work. Otherwise, it will always have a tinge of some desire or ego. And that is where both the Bhagavad Gita and Sri Aurobindo say that the purification, that is the first step of yoga, is highly and mostly helped by Karma Yoga. The first 6 chapters, Gita has 18 chapters, as I said. The first 3 chapters is called the path of purification, and that deals with Karma Yoga. The next 6 chapters deal with the way of illumination, and that is what is the Jnana Yoga. And the final 6 chapters is the way of unity, or what we call the Bhakti Yoga. And yet, it is not sequential. While it is easier to start with Karma Yoga because, as I said, number one, from the time we are born till the time we live, we are engaged in Karma Yoga. So it is a larger field of action. There is more time given to us to do this. And secondly, especially in integral perfection, where it is not just liberation that we are working on, but also transformation, where after we reach every height, we have to also bring down that light into our paths, what Sri Aurobindo calls the instruments of our being, and perfect them. There cannot be a better method than Karma Yoga. And there are these several stages of Karma Yoga, and we will go into it in depth. But before that, the important point is to understand the Swadharma and Swabhava. So there are portions of the Gita, and Sri Aurobindo also has written about in depth, that when we do work, there is a particular law of the being, there's a particular turn of the soul that each one of us is born with, which is called our Swadharma. So we have to follow that Swadharma, and the three gunas, or the sattva, rajas, and tamas, the combination of that is what constitutes our nature, or the swabhava. And that swadharma has to be executed through that particular swabhava. And this is, so the liberation both of soul and nature is what Sri Aurobindo talks about in his Integral Perfection. And when we go through the steps, we will see how we start by following our Swadharma and Swabhava, and then how they are combined and transcended. So the Gita also talks about the three stages of Karma Yoga, and I have superimposed it with Sri Aurobindo's The Mother, chapter number 5, and we will explore it in detail how these stages kind of proceed. So the first stage of Karma Yoga is when Sri Aurobindo says there is a awareness of a separate worker, and we are as a divine worker working, but one has given up or renounced the fruit of action. And in the Gita, this is called the Phala Tyaga, the first stage of Karma Yoga. The Isha Upanishad starts with this, the first verse, when it says that Tena Tyaktena Bhunjitha. And there is a very deep psychology here to understand, that Tena Tyaktena Bhunjitha is that by renouncing all, enjoy all. Only when the fruits have been renounced can we truly enjoy something. This is quite paradoxical, but it is true, because as long as we are attached to the fruit, we are not calm. We do not have that poise, because we are always restless and wanting that fruit of action. And once the fruit has been achieved, if we are attached to it, will we still be happy? No, because we then have the fear of losing it. So as long as we are attached to the fruit, there truly cannot be the enjoyment of it. And therefore, the first step of Karma Yoga is to work without the fruit of action. But then this takes us to this question, that isn't all action motivated by desire? And this is the question even Arjuna has for Sri Krishna, that you say that, give up all desire, but what is then the basis of action? And here is where the answer comes from the master, and Sri Aurobindo has gone into details of it, that how when this desire, human desire, is replaced by the divine will. Because once I was driving, I was in a car, and I saw a little child sitting in the lap of the driver, and it was holding the steering and was very happy, as if it was driving the car. And it just struck me that, is this not how we are? We think that we are the drivers of our lives, but actually, without me, the sun does come up every day morning, and the moon too. And it is everything goes on, the seasons change. It is not because of I will it, but there is a divine will which runs everything. And if it can run the sun and moon and for years and like thousands of years on time, then is it not also running me? But like the little child in the car, I think I am running my own life. So when we slowly start working and going inward and replacing our desires, we see that there is a master will that starts working through us. There is what is called by the term serendipity. We meet people, or some projects come our way which we had never thought of, or things start falling in place. One of the ways to accelerate it, mother says, is every day find at least half an hour or 1 hour to do work without any return or benefit. And this return or benefit can start from a very gross thing like money or fame, but it can also go to very subtler things like having a particular way that I should do this, or any kind of very subtle honor, and so on. So if 30 minutes to 1 hour every day we take up some work where nobody will know that we've done it, we are not getting anything out of it, that is the training to start doing work without desire. And the fulfillment that we will feel in that is what will help us take it to a larger and larger part of our life. So the example here I can give of is when I was with Amal Kiran. I shared a very deep friendship with him. And once when I went to his house, I saw he was busy typing. And he was truly a Karmayogi at work, because he would be typing on the typewriter something very deep, something of fate and free will or some such article. But the moment somebody dropped in without any notice, he would leave everything, attend to the person without feeling that he has been interrupted. And then with that equanimity, he could go back to typing whatever he was doing. So one of these days when I reached there, I saw he was on his typewriter, and there was a table and a group of people was sitting there discussing something. And I asked him, I said, Amal, what are they discussing? And he said that they're thinking of nominating me for the Nobel Prize. And then I said, and why are you not participating in the discussion? And he says, who cares for the Nobel Prize when my poetry has been seen and liked by Sri Aurobindo? So this is the when the entire fruit of what the world can give has been given up, because all one cares for is that the divine should like the work that one does, and one does all one's work for the divine. And the way to do this, other than finding 30 minutes to do some selfless work every day, is also through remember and offer. Through remember everything that I do, even like I take up this book here and keep it here, I remember my Ishta Devta. For us, it would be the mother in Sri Aurobindo, and offer. So remember and offer is the master key to that unlocks this first stage where one can become a perfect divine worker. And that is the first stage. As per the Gita, Phala Tyaga, and Sri Aurobindo says one becomes a divine worker. The second stage is that of a divine instrument, and what is called in the Gita Karma Tyaga. So this is the renunciation of modality. One not only has given up the fruit, the final attachment to the result, but also how it should be done. There is no preference. Generally, we do have a preferential way of doing it. But in the second stage, one is an instrument. Like when a doctor uses a particular knife or an instrument to do surgery, the instrument does not have a will of its own that I should be only used like this or like that. The only work of the instrument is to be used in the way the user wants it to be used. So in the second stage, we become the instrument. And when do we know that we are not the instrument? So there are these few checks and balances. I always like to have a practical way to deal with these things, so that at every moment you can know. And having this practice of reflecting and having a reflective journal where one notes down. Even the mother and Shubindo had record of yoga, and the mother used to write prayers and meditations. And it is always a good practice to keep reflecting, because this is one thing we have which animals do not have, this ability to observe, reflect, and be self-aware. So we should use it to the best of our ability. So as long as we have these three things, we know that we are not yet the divine instrument. The first is that we have this need for approval or validation or appreciation. Like this talk of mine can be just a karma or can become a karma yoga. If I want that you, all of you who are here, should like my talk, and when I post it on YouTube, there has to be 1,000 likes and so on, it is not karma yoga. But if the intent is to share and whatever one has studied of the mother in her service and offering, and then it becomes karma yoga. So why is need for approval uh, like not a right attitude? Because the ego is always in a separative state. When I want approval from another. So there I'm looking at all of you as not me, and I want validation. So as long as we are in this separative consciousness, we are not the instrument. So whenever we look into ourselves that we have this need for approval, we should correct ourselves and tell us that no, this is not the spirit of karma yoga. The second is, as long as we are judging somebody, we are not doing karma yoga. There is always a need to judge, to talk about others. We carry a big burden. It's always nice to travel lighter by this humility that as long as we do not realize the Atman or the Brahman or the any realization, we actually, the mind is unable to judge another. As a Sufi poet, Rumi says that the sinner and the saint are merely exchanging notes. The saint was once the sinner, and the sinner shall be sanctified. So let it be. So we give up this need to judge. And yet, there is always a very fine line, as I said, the judgment and discernment. Discernment is something that we can have. And the difference is that discernment does not produce any reaction of aversion or attraction, whereas judgment does. So this is the very subtle difference that we can look at, that not to judge. And we can use instead the mirror of relationships. If I am not liking something in somebody and I'm about to judge it, I should know that everything outside that I like or I do not like exists in me. Otherwise, I would not be able to even perceive it. And the moment we have this, in Karma Yoga, one of the tools is to use that fraction of a second that one has between the stimuli and the response. And that is where the free will comes in. We are always given that option, that choice of how we would like to, and that is what distinguishes Karma Yoga from ordinary action. So the moment I'm about to judge, if I just step back and tell myself that the fact that I am able to dislike something in that person means I have it within me in some form. And not only it makes me work on there for myself, it also makes me charitable to other people's mistakes. And that is where the mirror of relationships, because Karma Yoga, as I said, is a public yoga. We have the whole world as the field given to us, the kshetra, for the soul to be the kshetrajna, the knower of the field. And every circumstance, every interaction can be used to know oneself. And in order not to judge, we have to constantly work on replacing fear motivated behavior in us with love motivated behavior. This understanding that we are not only made, we are not only same, but we are even made of the same stuff. There's no essential difference between me and the other. And with this understanding comes this love for another. It helps one to become a better instrument. And finally, and how does there is a very interesting exercise to start seeing first the divine in everything. Like I have this book here. When I look at it, it has to be with this feeling of there is divine in this. There is divine in this. And then move to the second part of the everything in the divine. Because there's nothing else which is not in it. And the final stage is looking at everything as the divine. And that is when complete ekatvam anupashyata, as the Isha says, one sees that oneness that exists everywhere. And these relinquishing the need for approval, the need for judgment, and finally the need to control. The need to control is very self-explanatory, and it can be worked upon by this practice that we become self-nourishing and through that nourishing for others. We look at the welfare of others as the welfare of us. Then there is no need to control. Because as long as we know that when something passes through us, before affecting the other, it actually affects us. There is this adrenaline shot ups that happen, and the hormonal spikes, which first affect us. So when we become self-nourishing and nourishing for others, then we relinquish this need for control. And when all these three things we are not doing, we are actually working as the instrument of the divine. And finally, it is the third stage is we give up the very doership. It is called the kartitva tyaga, or Sri Aurobindo says, when we become from the divine worker to the divine instrument, we become the divine child of the mother, where we are in the heart of the mother, and the supramental energies can then freely play through us, because we don't exist anymore as this ego. And I had a insight when I went through these three, that these three very beautifully correspond to the three steps of supramental yoga. So when we become a divine worker, when we relinquish the I with the true I, this can be mapped to the process of psychicization. Because once one is psychicized, one is in this sense of eternal and universal, and one gives up individual seeking. So desire, which is of the outer soul, the surface soul, is given up at the level of the psychic. So this relinquishing of the fruit is relinquishing of desire, which gets taken care of through the first process of Sri Aurobindo's yoga, which is psychicization. When one gives up modality, this is the second step of spiritualization or universalization, because there is no preference of any particular method. While one starts with a swadharma, where either one is predominantly a person of knowledge or of honor and courage, and of kshatriya, or of mutuality, of a vaishya, or perfection of a shudra. In the second stage of instrumentation, one has to become chaturvarna. One has to acquire all these four. And the three gunas of rajas, tamas, and sattva, through which one expresses one's svabhava, those are transcended. So in the Gita, it is said that nirgunya, one becomes without these three gunas, and then one becomes three gunatita, one transcends these three gunas. And this happens when one has spiritualized, one is one with the Atman, universalized. There is no preference of method, of modality. One can be anything at any time, and that is when there is this oneness, and there is no one becomes a true instrument. And finally, the third stage, where one becomes the divine child, and Sri Aurobindo says in the Mother that the supramental energies freely then flow and work through that perfected instrument. That is when the doership is also gone. That is what is the spirit, the supramentalization. So I would like to end here, because this motif is repeated again and again through in many ways. Like the first, it is also can be kind of mapped with the three stages of when one becomes a sakshi first, the soul, the purusha becomes a sakshi, then the purusha becomes a sankshana, the anumanta, and finally the Lord, the Ishvara. So these are the three stages which recur again and again. But this is the path. The first is of relinquishing of the desire, replacing the ego with the psychic, which is the Nachiketa's boon of psychicization. And then one becomes free from all modality and a free instrument, which is spiritualization. And finally, it becomes one with the Divine Mother, and that is supramentalization. And supramentalization is the final crown of integral perfection, because by integral perfection is meant that no aspect of the human being is left out. The body, the mind, the emotions, the higher ranges of the mind, the subliminal ranges of the being, everything is raised to its highest and participates in the process of manifestation. And Karma Yoga is the ideal lever, because it provides us with that time, the amount of whole day as we go through it. It allows us through different circumstances and interactions, and there is an intelligence behind it. We just don't attract circumstances out of the blue. There is an intelligence that sends us the circumstances to chisel that part of us into integral perfection. I would like to pause here and take your questions.
Thank you so much, Gitanjali, for taking us step by step through the process. So I will ask you a question of mine, Gitanjali, if you don't mind. You had spoken about taking that instant before you react, to think about the possible reactions and choose an appropriate one. Can you just expand a little on how we can spend that second that we have before choosing to react, to choose the right one?
Yeah. So in the synthesis, when Sri Aurobindo talks about purification of lower mentality and purification of intelligence and will, he dwells on it in detail, that we have a desire, a sense mind, and then there is the manas, and then the buddhi. So the first step is to seize on the highest instrument that we have at our disposal, and which is the mind. And within the mind, there are these two levels, which I said is representative of Arjuna and Dhritarashtra, the higher mind of the buddhi and the lower mind of the sense mind. So there is and Karma Yoga also begins with this understanding of the Sankhya, right? That these are the minds that we have. So if you notice in any interaction, when a response comes to us, and that is what distinguishes us from animals, we do not have an instinctual response. And even though we do, there is a power that we have to stop. And Mother calls it stepping back. And that power of choice at that moment is actually critical, because the Gita again goes on to say that as per our character, the character is the sum total of our thoughts, and the thoughts are the sum total of our words, and the words are the sum total of our actions. So they are all linked. So at some point, if the thought is controlled or the action is controlled, then the response can be similarly controlled. And even Sri Aurobindo very beautifully says how it starts with endurance. You just decide not to express that particular anger. He even says like the Stoics. And we've had beautiful some examples in the past of the Karma Yogis. Gita talks about Janak, King Janak. And then we have this Marcus Aurelius, who was a Stoic, and he wrote the book Meditations. And the Stoics are the ones who have this power of endurance. You just don't express your reaction, because by expressing it, you keep giving it power and so on. So there are these various steps that one takes up. But the first is this decision to go through this process. And why is this necessary? Because the whole shift of Karma Yoga is that when we start acting from this higher consciousness, or the Atman, or we receive this indication from above, and any desire or reaction, it kind of muddles the water. It's like a water full of mud, which cannot reflect the moon. So the lower part of our mentality, therefore, has to be purified, only to be stilled, so that it can reflect the higher mentality.
We have a question which says, can you elaborate on the process of progress?
Yes, so this is where the whole understanding of Swadharma and Swabhava comes, and that is why it's a unique journey for all of us, and that is why Hinduism recognizes that as many people, so many paths. So, what for me is progress may be very different from you and the other, but there are some general, you could say, steps which have been spoken about in the Gita and Sri Aurobindo also. The first is that of equanimity. That is the first sign of progress. And this comes through what Deepa and I were just discussing, that when we are equal to the various dualities that present in our lives, like pain and happiness and joy and sorrow and success and failure. So the first step is this equanimity, and Sri Aurobindo has so many chapters on the way of equality, the action of equality, and so on. So that, I think, is the first step of our progress, where we do not react. And the second is, and these are not sequential. The second is this concentration and remembering and offering at every point. So once when I asked Amal to tell me what is Sri Aurobindo's yoga, he gave me a super abridged version of Sri Aurobindo's yoga. He said it is equanimity and remember and offer. And if we study the Kathopanishad, we know that if these two have been perfected, then the psychic, our consciousness has shifted from the ego to the psychic being. And after that, the psychic becomes the leader of the journey. After that, we don't have to do anything. And that's what Sri Aurobindo says, that as long as the personal effort is necessary till full surrender happens. After that, there's no personal effort. And this personal effort is these two things: to constantly remember and offer, and to constantly achieve a state of equanimity. And then the psychic opening happens. And after that, it is just the psychic that takes over as the leader of the journey.
This is in relation to both these discussions and questions we were having. There's a person who says sometimes the feeling is so strong within that there is a need to express it. So how do you discern, and what do you do with that intensity of feeling?
So we should be very careful not to suppress these feelings either. So that is what the path of, kind of not expressing the vital is. But in integral yoga, we don't mortify the vital. So it is a very difficult question, that when one is like full of anger, what does one do? Should one express it, or should one keep it within? And a lot of Western psychology talks about how if it is not expressed, it gives rise to certain diseases and so on. So that is where we talk of transmutation. We are neither, let's say I go to a government office and they just reject my file for the 10th time, and I'm very angry about the corruption that is there in it. So either I can scream there or shout at that person, or I can transmute that anger for transformation, for change. I can think of how can I work towards reducing this corruption in this country. So that is what the surface vital, when it is transformed into the inner vital, the subliminal vital. Anger actually can become a tool uh, when it is not expressed, for being an agent of change. Similarly, all that the superficial vital represents, like greed, greed can be transmuted as this huge aspiration for change or for something, because greed is generally like acquiring, right? And that is the, so these are the wrong things the surface vital has learned, and it is a reflection of a deeper vital. So this whole greed can be transmuted into aspiration, and that is what Shiva's damru represent. The Shiva's damru, the triangles which are on top of each other. The lower triangle of mind, life, and body are actually the counterparts of the higher triangle of Satchidananda. And so we can use the vitals, whatever actually hassles us is something that we need to work on. And either one works on the system to change it, or one works on oneself to transmute it. But it is a good thing. It can be used as a mirror to uh, transform oneself.
Okay. We have a question which is a request to you to share your daily practices, if you would, to offer everything to the divine. And linked to that is, do you have any suggestions on what we can do to purify the lower parts of our mind so that we can avoid the muddiness?
Mhm. So the knot of the lower mind and the lower vital in the synthesis, clearly Sri Aurobindo says, is the ego in the mind and the desire in the vital. And my daily practice is I get up early, and that's the only time I have, between 4:30 to 7:30, and I read because it's important to understand and meditate. And then I do some running or yoga between 7:30 and 8:30, and then office work from 9:30 onwards, and so on. But it is not important what these outer things are. That we can, somebody can do karate, or somebody can do running, or somebody may or may not read. It is one's own swadharma or swabhava. But what is important is, at every moment, see, is there something that is, whenever something is harassing us or hassling us, it means it is the ego that has got the touch. For instance, I call somebody 10 times and he does not call back, and I feel insulted. So that insult is felt by the ego. And it is an opportunity, an occasion for me to tell my ego, or to transmute it as, or with an understanding that anything is fine. That person may be busy, hasn't seen your call, that person does not want to call you back, or whatever. So use that situation to transcend that particular reaction. And that is the beauty of karma yoga, because one does come across all kinds of people and all kinds of things, and something you have worked for years, it does not happen. And every time there is a something that is bothering us, we know that it is only the ego that gets bothered. The psychic being will not get bothered. The Atman here will not get bothered. So we are still in our ego. It is a reminder, and then we step back and shift it a bit. And it's a, for me, it may look like it's a very long journey, but I'm very happy that we have this work, and nobody can take it away from us. Like, even when Sri Aurobindo was in Alipur jail, he had the experience of Krishna, immanent Krishna in everybody. So whether one is, and that is the beauty of Epictetus. He was, I think, a contemporary or student of Marcus Aurelius, and he was a Stoic. He practiced Stoicism. And can you imagine, he was a slave. He was a slave who was in chains, and he was the greatest Stoic the world has ever known. Which means even the chains, he said, they binding me in chains is not in my control, but how do I react to it? That is in my control. And that is the beauty. If we look at life, God has given us this tremendous treasure house that nobody can take away from us, of how we have to choose at every point and how we have to respond to life and what we have to aspire for. And we use every occasion, every disappointment, every failure to look at ourselves. So use it as a mirror uh, and grow. Yeah.
We have to end the session here because we are out of time. Thank you so much for this lovely, beautiful session. I hope we're able to take it with us and implement it and make each day of ours more joyful and more productive. Thank you so much, Gitanjali.
Thank you. I would just
Namaste.
end it with 4 lines of a poem that let us then be up and doing with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. This is by Longfellow. Thank you.
Thank you. Namaste.